Bienvenidos a todos hermanos y hermanas hispanohablantes. Donald Trump acaba de recibir uno de los golpes más duros de toda su presidencia después de que sus propios generales admitieran ante el Senado que ISIS y Al-Qaeda están creciendo nuevamente mientras que Estados Unidos pierde influencia y poder en todo el mundo. Pero lo que también comenzaron a revelar sobre Irán, África y Ucrania está generando demasiada intriga. Los más altos mandos militares de Donald Trump estaban testificando ante el Comité de Servicios Armados del Senado de los Estados Unidos y estos altos mandos militares arrojaron a Donald Trump debajo del autobús. Admitieron que, bajo el régimen de Donald Trump, ISIS, Al-Qaeda y otras organizaciones terroristas ahora estaban prosperando en África y en todo el mundo debido a la debilidad de Donald Trump. Estos altos mandos militares también admitieron esencialmente que Donald Trump tiene demasiado miedo como para involucrarse en operaciones militares en el estrecho de Hormuz, y lo que dijeron en esencia es que tenemos las capacidades militares para tomar el control del estrecho de Hormuz, pero que esto se encuentra a nivel de toma de decisión política sobre qué hacer a continuación, que está más allá de la competencia de estos funcionarios militares. Estos altos funcionarios militares que testificaron bajo juramento también admitieron que el presidente Zelensky de Ucrania ha sido quizás la fuerza más fundamental para ayudar a la democracia de todo el mundo a desarrollar sus ejércitos, y no los Estados Unidos. Y los funcionarios también están hablando de cómo la falta de financiamiento, ya sea para la USAID o para otros programas críticos, realmente ha puesto en peligro el poder blando y el poder duro, así como la capacidad de Estados Unidos para proyectar poder en todo el mundo. De modo que tuvimos el testimonio del almirante Brad Cooper, quien es el comandante del CENTCOM, el jefe del CENTCOM, y luego testificó el general Anderson, quien es el jefe del AFRICOM, el comando de África por si se lo preguntan. Así que déjenme mostrarles lo que está pasando aquí. Esto es material realmente asombroso que probablemente no está saliendo en ningún otro lugar, por lo cual para mí es muy importante mostrarles lo que realmente está pasando, ¿verdad? Porque Donald Trump anda por ahí diciendo, me deshice de Al-Qaeda, me deshice de ISIS, ya no hay organizaciones gracias a mí. Esto es lo que dice Donald. Y mientras tanto, lo que vemos que está ocurriendo en países como Mali y francamente en todo el continente africano y en todo el mundo es en realidad un resurgimiento de ISIS y de grupos vinculados con Al-Qaeda, con otras células terroristas, aumentando debido a la debilidad de Donald Trump. Así que aquí quiero mostrarles tanto al senador King como al senador Whitaker, quienes están interrogando o haciendo preguntas al general Anderson y también al general Cooper, pero principalmente al general Anderson aquí. Y quiero que vean cómo admiten que ISIS y estas organizaciones terroristas están en aumento en este momento y que de hecho representan un riesgo inminente, una amenaza inminente para los Estados Unidos. Entonces, ¿por qué esto no se está cubriendo en ningún lugar de los Estados Unidos más que aquí, sobre la amenaza de los Estados Unidos? Miren el clip, por favor.
You mentioned earlier that the Al-Qaeda and ISIS have resurged in Africa, and the term epicenter has been used several times of world terrorism. You use the term, you said they have the will and intent to attack the homeland. My question is, do they have the capacity? Are they developing weapons, strategies, other ways to take that will and intent and turn it into something of imminent danger to the American people?
Senator, that is the exact issue that is my top concern, is being able to provide, they have the assets necessary to provide the indication warnings to know and be able to identify when they shift from that will intent to have the capacity and capability. That is something that is very difficult for us to ascertain in the Sahel right now, given our limited posture.
That was going to be my follow-up question, is do we have the capacity to determine their capacity? It sounds like you just said we don't have the capacity that we should have or need.
Senator, we are, that's why in the President's budget, we have asked for additional intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities, and why we're also looking at a layered approach to look at everything from surface to space, to look at commercial assets, to look at emerging technologies, open source as well, and use these technologies, especially artificial intelligence, in order to fuse these multiple different types of layered ISR in order to gain that understanding and illuminate this black hole of intelligence in the Sahel. We cannot sustainably afford to do that solely with airborne ISR, so we have to look at a multifaceted approach. There are some very promising emerging technologies that we are looking into and that are affordable and sustainable, and that also can work with our partners. Because one of the key points to this is not necessarily ours to action. So having that the intelligence that we can share with partners so they can then action those on a mutual threat is going to be key to our future. But being able to understand that is the number one priority of the command, and where we are looking at investing with emerging technology.
And I think, as you've testified, if they take over the capital of Mali, that's a very dangerous moment.
That would be a game changer, I believe, in how they would be viewed internationally and what traction they would be then, I think, to other adherents.
Thank you. Thank you.
How would that affect Americans, General?
Well, I think that would then give momentum to these terrorist organizations that have the will and intent, and it would allow them to then start moving towards the capability and capacities that Senator King just mentioned. And so that then, I think, poses a threat in the long term to the United States as they continue to develop this. We know that they have not given up this intent, and it's just a matter of having the time and space to develop them.
And it would be Vladimir Putin that would be happiest about this. Is that correct?
The prudent that what, sir?
That it would be President Vladimir Putin who would rejoice at such a contingency? Or would it be Xi Jinping?
I can't speak for what either one of those leaders would believe, but I think that they would be able to parlay that to their interest.
Well, who's financing this contingency if it were to happen?
The terrorists?
Yes.
They're gaining they're through lots of illicit materials. So it's not necessarily directly from a state actor. They're working with, as I mentioned earlier, the narco-terrorist trafficking. They're doing this through kidnap for ransom. They're doing this through other illegal smuggling. They even do have their own taxation networks in the territories that they control where they generate millions of dollars.
And before I turn to Senator Scott, with regard to the funds that we're not spending anymore on USAID, but have been supplemented elsewhere, in terms of dollars, let's talk in terms of U.S. dollar equivalents. How does the food aid, health aid, and development aid that we're currently delivering in your jurisdiction compare to what China and Russia are doing?
Senator, I don't have those exact numbers. I'd have to get back to you on those, as those are often in other departments, other agencies within the government, but we can look into that for you and look at what that comparison is between China and Russia.
Well, if you would, then supplement that on the record for us, because I don't know the answer either.
Y luego les mostraré más del interrogatorio por parte del senador King. Miren, por favor.
General Anderson, talk to me about the loss of soft power in Africa, our abandonment of USAID, and what's happened with the Chinese and the Russians that my understanding is are now filling that gap in addition to the other aggressive actions that they're taking.
Senator, I would say that we look at all facets of national power and how to bring those to bear on the continent in order to provide security outcomes. Oftentimes,
taken one facet of our national power off the table unilaterally for no apparent reason. The whim of Elon Musk.
Senator, we work very closely with state, with commerce and energy in order to look at the security requirements on the continent. I have a Foreign Service Commercial Officer joining my staff this summer, along with a liaison from Department of Energy, in order to look at economic opportunities.
It is a fact, is it not, that we have essentially left all of the role that USAID played on the continent? That's gone. Isn't that's a yes or no question?
Senator, there are still aid programs that are active on the continent. They are much reduced from what they were before.
Much reduced. That's a fair way.
Entonces, a continuación quiero mostrarles parte del interrogatorio de la senadora Slotkin de Michigan. Aquí está su interrogación a Cooper y Anderson. Y ella también señala que está bastante claro que China le está dando a Irán todas estas armas, mientras que Donald Trump anda por ahí lamiéndole las botas a Xi Jinping. Y verán, quiero decir, estos militares, el general, el almirante, ellos como que admiten que esto es lo que está pasando, arrojando a Donald Trump debajo del autobús. Miren, por favor.
Do you believe, is that correct, that while militarily we may be able to physically open the straits, that they still retain the ability to affect infrastructure in the region and therefore kind of have a veto power over the world economy right now?
Senator, from a military perspective, I would characterize Iran as having a remnant capability across multiple domains. In terms of veto power, I'd really would defer to policymakers for that characterization.
But sorry, can they strike oil infrastructure across the Persian Gulf?
They have a very moderate, if not small, capability to continue strikes. And we, of course, have accordingly prepared for such a contingency.
Okay, but if we have the power to militarily open the straits and their threat is, quote, moderate or small, why wouldn't we just do it?
So I really would defer to policymakers in this particular matter. And the strait clearly is in the middle of the negotiation being undertaken now.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that they still certainly have, it may be diminished power, but if the United States military is not physically opening the straits right now, it's because the Iranians do have the real capability to affect strikes or drone strikes into the Gulf countries, affecting their oil infrastructure and sending the price of oil worldwide even higher. So, it may be diminished, but it's real capability unless I'm missing something. Can you describe for me, I'm very sensitive about the way that countries like Russia or China may be enabling the Iranians to target and kill American forces or to provide intelligence on their locations in real or near real time. Is it fair to say that the Chinese are providing intelligence to the Iranians to help them target U.S. forces?
So I think best to talk about anything regarding intelligence in a classified manner. What I can say is the Iranian military is largely made up of Russian and Chinese equipment.
Okay. I think, it feels like either Chinese government and or Chinese companies are helping and aiding and abetting the Iranians in providing that information. I understand we don't want to go into the details, but some of this is like out in open press. I would just say I personally feel like that crosses a Rubicon. Anytime we have another country providing that kind of intelligence to an adversary, I think that should play very heavily in our calculus and our conversations. I know the president is with the Chinese government right now, but I hope that no matter what party we're from, that's just a Rubicon. We all believe once you cross it, we're in a very different conversation, and I hope that's playing out in Beijing. I yield back.
A continuación les voy a mostrar a la senadora Hirono. Ella habla de cómo hemos sido significativamente perjudicados porque Donald Trump sacó a Estados Unidos del JCPOA, el acuerdo no nuclear de Barack Obama con Irán, lo cual metió a Estados Unidos en este terrible problema cuando Donald Trump se salió del JCPOA. Todo esto porque no le agrada a Obama y también una gran cantidad de los problemas que ahora se causan en el estrecho de Hormuz debido a Donald Trump. Observen lo que Hirono tiene que decir aquí. Miren, por favor.
Admiral Cooper, did the president ever explain to you why he tore up the JCPOA?
Senator, that's a policy matter that I would have expected anyone to discuss
He never
with me.
explained to you why he tore up the JCPOA. He either explained it to you or he
Senator,
didn't. I'm not asking you for the actual conversation, but did he happen to explain to you why he did something which led to the very nuclear crisis that we're now confronting regarding Iran and their enriched uranium?
Senator, I was in a completely different assignment when this occurred 8 years ago.
So apparently the president didn't have a discussion with anybody. In fact, it was a unilateral decision that he made. Now, you have vast experience, Admiral, and the Navy, et cetera. And before we attacked Iran, did it cross your mind that Iran may close the Strait of Hormuz?
Senator, as you know, one of my responsibilities as a combatant commander is to generate a wide range of options with associated risks and opportunities, present those to the Secretary and to the President. I think it'd be inappropriate to talk about what those specifically are.
I'm just asking
but
whether
we always make them very comprehensively.
Excuse me. I'm asking whether, with your experience, the thought that should we attack Iran, that they would close the Strait of Hormuz, did that cross your mind?
Senator, I've transited
Yes or no?
through the Strait about 100 times. I think of the Strait of Hormuz virtually every day.
So is that a yes?
I
That
think-
you
I think
are
it-
very
as-
aware that the Strait of Hormuz, the very thing that happened, that is something that you contemplated happening. I hope that is the case, because with your experience, I have to conclude that you contemplated that possibility. So you did mention that our diplomats are engaged in the negotiations. Well, who are those diplomats?
Senator, I really would refer to the White House, who specifically is engaged.
Well, apparently the diplomats are Jared Kushner, who I don't think even works for our country, and Mr. Whitlock, Steve Whitlock, who happens to be I don't think he has a lot of experience engaging in these kinds of negotiations. So here we are. The JCPOA, which was a very intense, the results of very intense negotiations among many countries. And for us to act as though the idea of a nuclear Iran is just something that occurred to President Trump and not to his predecessors is pretty ridiculous. And in fact, we had in place a regime that was intended to do that very thing, which was to prevent a nuclear Iran. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Y aquí es donde la senadora Sahel interroga a estos altos mandos militares sobre Ucrania y el apoyo de Ucrania al mundo a través de su poder militar. Miren, por favor.
One of the things that's gotten a fair amount of tension in recent weeks has been President Zelensky's working with some of our allies and partners in the Middle East in response to the war in Iran on the expertise that the Ukrainians have developed to address counter-drone responses. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing with respect to that, and whether our allies and partners find that kind of support helpful from the Ukrainians?
Senator, I think most significantly, we adopted a large number of tactics, techniques, and procedures that the Ukrainians have passed us that have helped us defend Americans. And all of our partners are working with Ukraine in some way, shape, or form. I'd really defer to them, let them talk about it. But are they more effective as a result? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Luego, el senador Blumenthal estaba cuestionando al almirante Cooper sobre la capacidad de los Estados Unidos para abrir o reabrir el estrecho de Hormuz. Y de nuevo, lo que Cooper parece estar diciendo es que podemos hacerlo. Eso es lo que Donald Trump no lo está haciendo. Donald Trump se retiró del proyecto de libertad y Cooper reacciona como realmente no sé por qué lo hicimos. Pero yo no tengo ni voz ni voto en esto. Miren el clip, por favor.
Regardless of what the numbers are, Iran continues to pose a significant threat to shipping because it has missiles and fast boats and other assets that are available to attack shipping in the area, correct?
Senator, in each of those cases, their capability have been significantly degraded. If I just use my own professional experience, in 100 transits through the Strait of Hormuz, you would typically see 20 to 40 fast boats, and lately we've seen 2 or 3. So the degradation means it's been significant, but some residual capability does exist.
With respect to the threat that remains, your forces were successful in Project Freedom in enabling ships to go through the strait, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And Project Freedom was stopped for what reason?
Senator, I think I'll look back a couple of days ago on the chairman of the Joint Chiefs testimony before the Senate Appropriations Committee. I think he characterized it well. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz is rather complex these days, and I would offer just these quick points. First and foremost, the United States controls, via our blockade, which I'd be happy to talk about, the overall flow of commerce going into and out of Iran. The Iranian capability to stop commerce has been dramatically degraded through the straits, but their voice is very loud. And those threats are clearly heard by the merchant industry and the insurance industry. Those are factors. There's certainly factors in energy.
But
and on top of all
Project, I apologize for interrupting, but I'm going to run out of time, as you understand. I think the point that I want to make here is that Project Freedom could be started again, and the voices of the Iranians, large as they are, could be contradicted or reduced in impact if Project Freedom were ongoing and the world could see that shipping was going through the straits. Am I off base in that view?
Senator, there's a wide range of contingencies that we are prepared to execute. I would defer to the policymakers on anything having to do specifically with the Strait of Hormuz, particularly during this time of sensitive negotiations where it's front and center in the negotiations.
And have you seen any progress in those negotiations?
Senator, I'd refer to the diplomats and the team engaged in the negotiations.
Let me ask you, in the time that I have left, one of the objectives that President Trump articulated at the beginning of this war, which in my view could not be accomplished with bombing, was to secure the enriched uranium. Would you agree that taking possession of that uranium would require boots on the ground and significant casualties for United States forces?
Senator, in this particular forum, I think it would be highly inappropriate, given the classified nature of any contingencies, to talk about the nuclear program.
A continuación les voy a mostrar al senador Kelly, quien tenía muchas preguntas sobre cómo el régimen de Donald Trump desmanteló a todo el equipo que se enfoca en trabajar con estos militares para evitar bajas civiles. Ahora, quiero que presten mucha atención a las respuestas aquí por parte del almirante Cooper, porque les voy a mostrar en un momento lo que preguntó la senadora Gillibrand. Y Gillibrand estaba prestando mucha atención a las preguntas del senador Kelly justo aquí. Y Cooper habla de cómo hubo este incidente que han estado investigando. Él no lo menciona por su nombre, pero es la escuela primaria de Manap, donde, ya saben, Estados Unidos, el régimen de Donald Trump, se involucraron en estos horribles crímenes donde lastimosamente terminaron quitándole la vida a 168 niñas dentro de una escuela primaria. Esto fue horrible. Cualquiera que haya estado involucrado en esto, incluyendo las personas que están sentadas ahí, deberían de ser juzgados, incluyendo a Cooper. Debería de ser juzgado quien haya hecho esto. Quiero decir, es un crimen de guerra. Él formaba parte de la cadena de mando. Esto no es legal. Tú enviaste un Tomahawk y acabaste con 168 niñas pequeñas. Pero observen lo que responde aquí. Y también quiero hacerlo responsable porque él está involucrado. Y les quiero dejar algo claro antes de que vean el clip. La ignorancia no es una defensa legítima. Miren el clip, por favor.
China and Russia continue to expand their influence across Africa. We discussed this with misinformation, disinformation across many African countries. You requested $94 million for information operation activities. You were promised, and this is in fiscal year 26, you were promised $25 million from the department. You ultimately received only $19 million. Can you talk about the difference between having $19 million to do that job and $94 million? Like, what are you able to do if you were fully funded? General Anderson, I get it. I mean, we see this stuff all the time. The amount of misinformation that comes from the Chinese and the Russians, it is a huge problem. But if you could just explain to us a little bit about what you could do if you had the full request.
Senator, I think the key point there is right now we are in a reactionary mode to propaganda and to other information operations to what we can do at the moment. What the fuller funding would do, especially if it's consistent over time, would allow us to build an information campaign and address these issues across the continent. We're one of the few organizations that looks across the entirety of the continent and can understand how these propaganda and misinformations play across borders. We work very closely with the State Department and U.S. embassies on this to make sure our messaging is key, but this would allow us to do is help coordinate that messaging across regions and across the continent to highlight the issues that come with this misinformation, especially as much of it is destabilizing the democracies across the region.
Do you ever feel like we should be countering some of their disinformation with disinformation of our own?
Sir, I think the most powerful tool we have is the truth. What America brings is very unique. We're still a beacon of hope and light in the world. And I think we should be willing to talk about who we are. This is America's 250th anniversary. There's a long history on the continent that is, I mean, it's good and bad, but there's a lot of good that we can talk about of what America brings. The fact that John C. Robinson founded the Tuskegee Airmen, 2 years later founded the Ethiopian Air Force, and then went on to found Ethiopian Airlines, which is now the pride not only of Ethiopia, but Africa. It's not a story that's well known, but that is a tie that we have had between the aviation communities for years. There are multiple stories like that across the continent that we need to propagate and talk about. So I would say we should focus on the goodness and the positivity of engaging with America and worry less about the disinformation that our partners put out, but we have to engage in this environment. We have to be active in the information space.
So you got about 25% of the requests. So if you got the full amount, you could put more out there, positive stuff that the United States is doing. And I know these are, challenging times with resources, even beyond what DoD has, USAID and others. But do you think that would be sufficient to counter Chinese and Russian misinformation?
Senator, I think information operations is one of the lower cost investments that we can make that have outsized return and help amplify the limited resources we have in the military side and highlight the benefits that those provide. And being able to talk about that broadly, I do think has outside proportion. So small investments can have a large impact. And this is an area of information where I think we can make a lot of gains, even despite our smaller physical presence, that can highlight the totality of what the United States brings.
I 100% agree with you.
Así que ahora los llevo a este clip de la senadora Gillibrand y aquí verán a la senadora hacer lo que creo que es un interrogatorio perfecto. Les mostré este clip creo que videos atrás. Quiero que vean este clip con todo el contexto. Cuando ven lo que otros senadores estaban preguntando y observen cómo la senadora Gillibrand expone que el ejército de los Estados Unidos, especialmente el CENTCOM y todo el ejército debido a Donald Trump y Pete Hegseth, no ha realizado ninguna investigación, es básicamente una admisión sorprendente. Ninguna investigación sobre ninguna de las bajas civiles, aparte de Manab, y por lo tanto están todos estos otros incidentes donde el régimen de Donald Trump utilizó misiles Tomahawk para acabar con la vida de niños, para acabar con personas en hospitales, para acabar con la vida de personas inocentes en gran parte, y eso no ha sido investigado. Eso es tan antiestadounidense. Esto es horrible. Observen las preguntas de la senadora Gillibrand. Miren, por favor.
Have you been implementing all the laws that are required under current law to minimize civilian death?
Senator, we have executed every operation consistent with the law of armed conflict. The subject of civilian casualties is a particular passion of mine. We pay attention to it. We follow all the procedures and have gone above and beyond to, in my case, personally warn the Iranian people of several instances during conflict where they were being potentially used as human targets.
If they've been warned, how did we then bomb 22 schools?
There's no indication that we have that has been corroborated.
How many schools have we bombed?
There is one active civilian casualty investigation from the 13,629 munitions.
So how do you explain the publicly available information that 22 schools have been hit and multiple hospitals?
There's no way that we can corroborate that. No indication of that whatsoever, Senator.
There's no way you can corroborate or no indication of it? Which one?
No indication.
Well, the indication is what's publicly available. There is indication. Have you investigated those claims?
We have not.
Why have you not? If this is a passion of yours, if you believe that the civilian casualties are not consistent with the law of war and not consistent with human rights obligations that our military regularly follows with great pride and great diligence, why have you not investigated those allegations when they're publicly being made on the cover of the New York Times?
I'll be happy to take a look at each instance.
I would like a report.
Will be able to do that.
I would like a report from you, from your team, about whether there have been attacks that have resulted in the destruction of schools and hospitals. And if so, why? And how then last have you managed the 90% cut to the personnel who are supposed to avoid civilian targets?
Happy to provide any report, and I would invite you and every staff member here to come to Tampa to look at the process to see exactly how it works.
Y bueno amigos, ahí lo tienen. Esto es lo que está pasando. Déjenme saber su opinión en los comentarios, porque como siempre les digo, para mí su opinión es lo más importante. Y no tengan miedo de comentar. De verdad, hay mucha gente que me dice, no comento porque luego me van a decir que estoy equivocado. No, aquí no pasa esto. Gracias a Dios, y en serio a Dios, tenemos una gran comunidad llena de personas muy buenas. Así que comenta lo que tú consideres, para bien, para mal, siempre y cuando no le faltes el respeto a nadie. Sin nada más que decir, les recuerdo que si les gusta contenido de política estadounidense, les va a encantar suscribirse al canal, ya que subo videos como estos todos los días. Mi nombre es José Alvarado, soy economista y estoy comprometido a informarlos diariamente. Nos vemos en el siguiente video. Adiós.